VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. A triumphant episode of VikesNow. Probably the most glorious, certainly since last year. Probably since they beat the Giants off Greg Joseph's mammoth franchise record-setting field goal. But I digress. I'm here with Josh Frey to talk about this victory over the 49ers and what it means going forward. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Definitely huge win on Monday night. Seems like it changed the momentum of the team moving forward. You beat the 49ers, and now the schedule gets mushy like we talked about last week, and hopefully we can go on a roll now.
That's the best part of it, mathematically, is heading into the week. So Thursday night football included with the Saints losing. There was this hodgepodge of scenarios that, if blah, blah, blah happened and then the Vikings somehow beat the 49ers, they'd be sitting pretty. And almost all of those things happened, minus the Buccaneers, losing to the Falcons. So all of a sudden, according to New York Times' playoff simulator, where they do like the 30,000 simulations, you press the button, Vikings have 56% chance of reaching the postseason. And I'm not making this up. And it only enhances if they beat the Packers and then the Falcons. But what I want to talk to you about first is, oh boy. So the national media doesn't seem as thrilled as Vikings fans, which is understandable. It seems to me like fans have decided, well, wow, if they could beat the 49ers, mushy part of the schedule is afoot. We think we can do this. Now, when things were not going well, you foresaw this looks like a 6-11 team. And then they beat the 49ers on Monday Night Football. Is this a circumstance kind of like last year where somehow the Colts defeated the Chiefs in week 3 and we're like, what? Or is this more along the lines that the Vikings were good the whole time and all that stuff we said about fixing the turnovers and you'll be pretty good? Which is closer to the truth?
I definitely see the point of view where you could say kind of this is a little bit of a fluky win considering they were without Debo, they were out with Trent Williams, and they were coming off that game in Cleveland last weekend. But at the end of the day, you look at what happened on Monday night, it doesn't really feel like it was a fluky win at any point. Like Christian McCaffrey had almost 100 yards from scrimmage. He had a couple touchdowns. George Kittle had a solid game outside of the 2 interceptions, which I guess you could call fluky considering the Vikings just haven't really done that a ton this season. There really isn't anything to go off of that suggests that the Vikings didn't belong in this game. They won the first down battle. They won the time of possession battle. They won the ground game, which is just crazy considering this was the 49ers really they were going up against. And yeah, they won the third down conversion battle. Like this is what we've been asking from this Vikings team all season. And it feels like it finally transpired on Monday night. And I do think that it definitely feels more legit than some of the more national people are letting on.
Do you stand by the dreadful 6-11 forecast, or have you seen enough in the past 2 weeks? Because let's face it, they've won the last 2 games, even if the Bears one was ugly. Or do you now actually have the tangible belief that, man, they could win 5 out of their next 6, and this will feel like 2017? Or is that just getting way too far ahead of ourselves?
I definitely feel a lot better. That 6-11 prediction was kind of leaning towards the idea that they'd trade a couple of their veterans if they fell to like 2-5, if they lost on Monday night, 2-6, God forbid, if they lost to the Packers. But now that they're 3-4, they're right back in the playoff race. Like you said, I don't think that they're moving any of these guys. I don't think it would be a good idea to move Danielle Hunter at this point. I think he provides a great pass rushing presence for their defensive line. And if they're actually going to get back into this thing, they're like basically half a game out of the playoffs at this point. So I don't think that they're going to move any of these guys. So I feel much better. If you beat the 49ers, what's to say you can't beat the Packers, beat the Falcons, beat the Bears, beat the Raiders, beat the Broncos? Like all these teams are way worse than what they faced on Monday night, and they showed up to the challenge. So I do think that this is definitely a lot. I feel a lot better about this team than I did a couple weeks ago.
Think about the criminality if your phone buzzed this moment and said Danielle Hunter traded to the Buccaneers, where last week you would have been like, yeah, makes sense. At least we got a blah, 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 like second rounder and a fourth or something for him. But now if you saw that, you'd be like, what?
Yeah, why?
It'd be malpractice after you. I mean, I am close to 100% certain that Danielle Hunter won't be traded, even if they get beat 41-0 at Green Bay. I think they would use it as a rallying cry, because then the really easy part of the schedule is afoot. We're going to talk about this in a minute. I actually think the Vikings could be buyers. The way that Kwesi has done business, I would love Chase Young. I'd love for them to do the Hawkinson deal from last year for Chase Young, if that could be doable. But we will get into that in a second. What I want to ask you first, in case I forget, is what does Lambeau Field against the Packers look like here in 4 days or so? Because for the first time in 31 years, Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers is not attached to this roster. And I told my wife on the drive home from Minneapolis late Monday night, I was like, this is the first time I've ever been excited to go play at Lambeau Field. I'm flat out I can't wait to watch the game. Usually, because Rodgers always plays so pristine, and because Favre was such a fun-loving gunslinger, I'd sit down, oh, here we go, let's get this shit over with. But now I'm like, let's do it. Let's bring it on, because I know their quarterback isn't going to be utterly elite. And if he is, it'll be a one-game outlier. With all of that said, what does this game look like, and how are you feeling about it?
I feel pretty dang good about it. I mean, I thought Jordan Love looked really good over the first couple weeks, and I kind of bought into the fool's gold. But over the past 4 games, it's been a completely different story. Obviously, injuries probably play a role in that too. They've been without Devondre Campbell for 4 weeks now, and Aaron Jones finally got back on the field last weekend, but he still doesn't really look like his normal self. But yeah, Jordan Love has thrown 7 interceptions over the last 4 games compared to just 4 touchdowns. So I think this is another golden opportunity for the Vikings to go steal a road game, force a couple extra turnovers. And if they do what they did on Monday night and just take care of the ball for the most part, and they develop some sort of running attack, which the Packers have been pretty good at stopping the run so far this year. Mm-hmm. But if they can do those 2 things, I think that they have a really great chance at going and winning this game, winning 3 in a row and getting back to 500.
It's a real precious moment on Sunday, because you have extreme momentum from beating the best team in football. And now you're playing against a team that doesn't have Aaron Rodgers for the first time since 2005. And I said this on Twitter, because of that momentum and the fact you're going to your rival's building, who's beat your ass the last 2 seasons, you really have an opportunity to let your nuts dangle a little bit and show them, you know what? The Lions are all the rage. That's great. We're only 2 games behind them. But you don't have Aaron Rodgers anymore. And we just beat the 49ers. You have this pivotal hinge about this 2023 season, that if you beat the 49ers and then you, whatever type of victory it is, I'm not asking for a blowout. I'm just asking for even an ugly one, like the Bears game. If you can beat the Packers and then get to 500, and then all these games afoot that seem so winnable, it feels like a real, this is it, gentlemen. And wouldn't you think they realize that in the locker room too, because it's Packer week?
I certainly hope so. Yeah, they have great momentum going into this game, like you said. My one worry is that maybe this is a bit of a letdown game. Like you said, you're coming off a game against the top team in the NFC. You're riding high. You're probably thinking, hey, we can go beat anybody in the league at this point. And with the mushy schedule coming up, maybe they're looking past this game. But I at 3-4, I don't think you can do that. Yeah. I think you have to go in with the mindset of just winning on a weekly basis, getting back into this playoff hunt. So yeah, I think that they're facing the golden opportunity here. Packers have not looked good over the past few weeks. The Lions did not look great at all last weekend either. And if that trend continues, there's a very serious chance that the Vikings can definitely get back into this divisional race. They just have to take it one game at a time here.
I was asked about the possibility of a letdown or a hangover game this morning on a radio show. And I know all about those. It could happen, but I think that this version of Vikings realizes that there's no room for that bullshit, because when you were flying high after beating the Bills, what were they, 9-1 or something like that? And that was a mind-boggling, crazy, lucky regular season win where a dude fumbles on the goal line. For the most part, beating the 49ers didn't involve a, oh my God, where were you in moment. It was just like the Vikings for that night only were the better football team. And I will say about the Lions, all the Vikings have to do, even though the Lions have an easy schedule as well, they have to stay within 2 games until Christmas Eve, and then they would control their own fate. So let's say whatever, oh man, I didn't have this tabulated, but all they have to do is be within 2 games of reach, and then if they beat the Lions twice, then they would host a home playoff game, which feels so weird when we were talking last week about, I don't even feel good about that Bears win. It was so ugly. It's crazy how things can change. Now, we talked about the trade deadline, which is really close, 6 days away. And in the prior weeks, we always said, well, they're probably going to be sellers if they're going to be 2-5 or something. Get rid of Daniil Hunter, maybe get a first from somebody for him. I think all the Kirk trade stuff died down after he said ain't going to happen. KJ Osborne was in the mix. Let's see. Jordan Hicks was, in theory, a Buffalo candidate because of all their injuries. Is it more likely to you that the team will be buyers, sellers, or nothing at all?
I think the least likely scenario is nothing at all, considering how much Kwesi likes to trade. And we saw him swing a couple trades last season, got TJ Hawkinson at the deadline. The one name that I think it's a lot more likely that they're buyers after this win, with how easy their schedule gets, with the divisional race definitely within reach at this point. And a name that I definitely have an eye on is Jonathan Allen. You mentioned Chase Young, and I think they might go after Jonathan Allen just because he's been just a terrific pass rushing presence from the interior of the defensive line for Washington over the past few years. They definitely could use another pass rusher, especially on the interior with Marcus Davenport on IR, and who knows when he's going to come back. Harrison Phillips has looked decent. Jonathan Bullard has been a revelation in terms of his run stopping over the past few weeks. I think PFF has him as the 8th best defensive lineman in terms of run stopping. Yeah, it's crazy how this defense has turned around after week 2. And if you get a guy like Jonathan Allen, veteran presence, can wreak some havoc in the middle of a defensive line, I think that's a guy I'd go get right now.
So not that Washington Commanders pass rusher, but the other one.
Yeah.
And he could get to from, like, we haven't had a true blue stud defensive tackle in forever. So that would be noteworthy. But to your point, it would feel a little criminal. Maybe Dean Lowry's spot would be doable, but even he has a reduced snap count in the last month or so after he kind of struggled out of the gate. But it's weird to think that this defense is really gelling on the fly. I think we were really turned off by the Chargers game when the blitzes weren't even working. And the guy, Herbert, still threw for 400 passing yards. But ever since then, even against these good teams, now, I wouldn't say against the 49ers they were great. I mean, they still did a lot of marching, but at the end of the day, they only allowed 17 points. Let's see. And then DJ Wanham, all of a sudden, he looks like he can stop the run. And where did that come from? That's never been his forte. So Jonathan Allen, the other thing I want to ask you before we get to the final little topic is, I've been thinking about being buyers, these Vikings, Kwesi, being a buyer of assets, but it's weird that there really aren't a whole bunch of spots that you need to get better besides the defensive line, mainly because Marcus Davenport is a big question mark, which you predicted. But where else on the roster? You already did your running back move. KJ should be back in 2 games. They got a lot of cornerbacks. All of them are pretty good, not great. Linebackers are steady. Like, what else would Kwesi buy?
Yeah, I really don't know, because like this like you said, this is a really solid roster top to bottom at this point. Like, safety was a question mark last year, but that group has been playing outside their mind all season long. Cameron Bynum has just been an absolute stud through the first 7 weeks of the season. Wide receiver, I guess maybe, but like you said, Justin Jefferson's going to be back probably in a couple weeks. Naylor. And you got Jalen Naylor back, so get him a couple reps at some point maybe. But yeah, there aren't a ton of spots that I'd say they desperately need to get better at this point. Maybe the one spot would be corner, just because Byron Murphy hasn't exactly been that guy that we had hoped he would be in terms of his coverage so far this season. And part of that's just because he's lining up against some of the top receivers in the league, and that's just going to happen sometimes. But yeah, there really isn't a ton of spots that they need to get better right now. It's kind of crazy considering all the holes that we could easily point out last year. Like, the defensive line wasn't great. The tight end before they got TJ Hawkinson was a huge question mark. But yeah, this year feels completely different.
And it's so strange, again, because you and I did a show and they were 1-4. And it felt like even doing game recaps was stupid because we needed to start to look at the trade deadline and then the draft order. And now we're talking about how there isn't really anything you need to trade for because the roster's too good. Like, it's any given Sunday, my man. All right, my final question for you is, above all else, what was your biggest takeaway from Monday Night Football? This can be Kirk, this can be the defense, this can be anything.
I think that we definitely have to give praise to Kirk Cousins and Jordan Addison for what he did on Monday night. That dude was absolutely incredible. But my biggest takeaway from this game is this run defense. It's proven to be legit. They held Christian McCaffrey to 3 yards a carry on Monday night, which is it's not easy to do. The only other time that's happened this season is when they played against the Cowboys. And that defense, we know all about it. It's one of the best defenses in the league. But ever since that week 2 game in Philly, this run defense has stepped up. They've held opponents to under 100 rushing yards in 4 of their last 5 games. And I think Monday night really solidified that this run defense is legit now.
And some of those, albeit on passing downs, it's hilarious to watch. They don't even have any defensive linemen out there.
No,
they just have
it's all safeties.
It's like, what, like, if it wasn't working, for instance, we'd be like, of course it's not working. They don't have any linemen on the field. But it just, if Flores does it, it works. And that's the weird part. And what I keep coming back to, and I even told this to my wife when we were driving home, is like, you start to look, all right, well, how did they beat the 49ers? Debo was out, Trent Williams was out, the Vikings were at home, they were due for a win. And anytime I would try to rationalize it in the opposite way, like, did they just get lucky? I come back to the central point that Justin Jefferson wasn't on the field. So They somehow beat the 49ers without their best player, albeit Debo and Trent Williams were out. But this would have been an impressive win if Jefferson was there. And I think the goal line struggles would have been vanished if Jefferson was there. But then with him out, it's like, God, they did the thing. We talked about how it would be the most Vikings thing ever if they lost Justin Jefferson, went to injury reserve, and they started winning games. That's exactly what happened.
Yep. It makes absolutely no sense. But again, it all really comes down to, for me, Jordan Addison is just emerged as a star. The dude is second in the league in touchdown receptions. His route running is just absolutely unbelievable. They got him a bunch of free looks on Monday night, and if they can continue to do that with his speed and his ability to get downfield in a hurry, they definitely can go win a few games. And once Jefferson comes back, if we continue to see this version of Jordan Addison, you'll be hard pressed to find a secondary that can stop this team, because the best secondary in the league couldn't stop him, and Jefferson wasn't on the field.
That is I was telling Yannick Eckhart in Germany last night that, let's say all of this momentum and esteem that we have in the days after the 49ers, let's say it's fool's gold and they end up doing the shit where they make it 7-10 or something like that. Even if that happens, you can take solace in knowing for the next 4 years, assuming the Jefferson deal gets done, you're going to have those two no matter what, whether it's Kirk or Jaron Hall or Drake May or Shadur Sanders. The long term on offense, the draft plan worked. You're going to have a guy who, I can't see a world where Jordan Addison, this is all just some big outlier. You know, he was good for his first 7 games, then he turned into Laquan Treadwell. That's not going to happen. So the prognosis for Vikings football, even if this turns out to be a disappointing season, is, man, you have 2 WR1s for the next 4 years and hopefully longer.
And you got TJ Hawkinson in the middle who can just catch passes and get a few yards every now and again. You got one of the best tackle duos in the league, and Darisaw and O'Neal, assuming that Darisaw gets his extension too in the next couple of years. But yeah, even if they move on from Kirk, you plug in a young quarterback into this system, and it's about as good as you're going to get. It's going to be the easiest transition for a college QB into the NFL if the Vikings go out and get one this spring.
Especially if Flores sticks around.
I
think we were saying 2 weeks ago, like, well, the defense probably isn't good enough for him to go land a head coaching gig, but it seems like slowly but surely, especially, I remember I told you this, if Belichick walks away, even though he allegedly had the extension during the summer, I think he would be right at the top of the list for the Patriots coaching vacancy. But if he stays and 1 extra year, 2 extra years, and then you have your rookie quarterback guy with all that slew of an offensive roster plus Brian Flores defense in year 2 or year 3, it's really fun to think about.
It really is. I think Flores should be up for assistant coach of the year at some point when the offseason rolls around, because what he's done with this defensive group, turning it around from what it was last year to what it is now with essentially a lot of the same personnel, especially on the front, it's been absolutely incredible what he's done. He's revamped Harrison Smith, who had a bit of a down year last season. Jordan Hicks looks like an absolute star, and he won Defensive Player of the Week last week, which was very well deserved after his showing against the Bears. And now Cameron Bynum's probably going to win it again this week. So yeah, this group has been absolutely incredible. And it's all, if they go and get a young QB, or if they just plug in Jaron Hall, it's going to be an easy transition next year. Or maybe they just keep Kirk around at this point, because he had a great game on Monday.
Some would say that the off-season subtractions, Eric Kendricks, Duke Shelley, Patrick Peterson, Chandon Sullivan, that was even more of a challenging task for Flores, because you took all the experience away and said, hey, do this thing with this young guy. You can have Jordan Hicks back. And, at that time we were like, oh, big whoop, Jordan Hicks is coming back. And, all of a sudden, he could be a Pro Bowler. That's how well he's playing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, sir. We have the Packers at noon on Sunday, and then another road game at Atlanta, who is kind of thinks they're good, but isn't really good. They don't use their playmakers. After that, at home against the Saints, and then away against the Broncos, perhaps a Monday night football game to be flexed, and then on the road at the Raiders in a bye week. This is the time that we saw way back in May when we saw the schedule. We're like, whew, if we can just be decent by that time, we can go on a run. It is here, especially since the Packers don't look gangbusters. Any closing arguments?
Yeah, like you said, we're at this point. We got through the tough part of the schedule. Now we got to roll through the easy part. Can't take any games off here over the next few weeks. Every game is important. Hopefully we go get a dub on Sunday.
Amen. All right, we'll talk to you in 1 week. You take it easy, all right?
You too. See you then.
Later.